I'm wondering, given the current situation with the CBA, are the Blue Jays one of the teams that you think are maybe just keeping their powder dry until they absolutely know with 100% certainty which direction this thing is going? We've talked about the Red Sox and David Dombrowski being very open, and he's kind of waiting for a little more guidance here. And I wonder if the Blue Jays are the same way.
Potentially, Jeff. I do think that no matter what they do, they'll be comfortably below the $189 million threshold for the luxury tax this past year, which I have a hard time thinking in any circumstance that number would go down. So I don't see the Jays as being a ball club that's going to challenge that number. So from their purposes, actually, they can be somewhat aggressive because they both have resources, and they're not, at least from what I can tell in my calculations, they're not really at danger of tripping over that $189 million threshold there anytime soon, at least. So again, I think the argument that I make along the lines of why free agency makes sense, whether it's a Dexter Fowler or even potentially on the bullpen side as well, is if the idea is to protect the prospects that you have, which is what Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins have talked about a lot since they took over a little more than a year ago, is that if they want to protect the prospects, then fine, and then that's why you have one of the the largest single season attendance increase that we had in baseball between 2015 and 2016. You've got the revenues now to do it. So I think you're in a really good situation to go out there on the open market and then use that financial wherewithal that you've accumulated over the last year, and then keep your prospects in the minor leagues as you'd like. I mean, you could certainly Green and Reed Foley. There are some names down there that prospects that teams certainly would ask about. But if the idea is that eventually that you need those guys at the major league level, then I do think free agency right now, Jeff, is the more sensible play for them, which would mean potentially a Dexter Fowler or again the relievers that I mentioned, the likes of Boone Logan or a Jerry Blevins, perhaps.
Where do you see Dexter Fowler's market going?
Jeff, to me, Dexter Fowler is a 4 or 5 year contract player. I think at probably $15 million a year or thereabouts. I look at it and say, if he signed a deal tomorrow for 4 years and $60 million or 5 years and 65, I would say that's about what I expect it's going to be, somewhere in that range. He is a phenomenal leadoff hitter. We saw what he did in the World Series. We saw what he did in Game 7. So clearly a sense for the big moments there. Great guy in the clubhouse. I think his defense, there was a bit of a blip here in the last couple of years, but I think he really stabilized and got better in 2016. And again, he just gives the Blue Jays some balance. He gives them some left balance, which they need badly. Of course, he's a switch hitter. So I think for so many different reasons, Jeff, he fits this team very well. If it's not him, I think Adam Eaton via trade is a possibility if the Jays do decide that they're willing to go that route. And I think the big question is, and I know it's been talked about before, if Biagini is going to be in the rotation or at least looked upon that way, then you do wonder about Stroman and if they would consider putting him out there. Again, I'm a big believer in Marcus's future. I think that he would be phenomenal to stay in Toronto, and I think the Jays probably want him to ideally stay in Toronto. But I do sense, Jeff, that there is that slight possibility that if they are flummoxed in their efforts via free agency and they want to make a trade, and let's say they want to hold on to their younger guys, or perhaps other teams aren't as keen on those minor league guys, that the young, controllable major league starter like Stroman, I think his name is going to surface in some of these trade talks.
Yeah, and I know both Stephen Brunt and myself have said that a couple of times, that I don't think you can rule it out. There's a big difference between saying, hey, we're trying to trade a guy, and not ruling it out. And I think that's kind of the point they're at now. The return would have to be great, but you look at this team and you go, okay, where is the position of depth? Well, that's kind of the position of depth. And then you say, all right, in that position of depth, who do you realistically, if you had to prioritize guys you want to keep, guys you want to move, guys you'd get the most for, Stroman would tick off all those boxes.
Oh, he would. And I think you look at the way that, again, Jeff, the fact that we're seeing this starting pitching market for trades develop somewhat quickly this year, at least in terms of the conversations. We haven't seen a whole lot of action yet, but there has been heavy dialogue. I was told that by a number of different executives here in the last couple of weeks, and it's because the free agent market for pitching is not very good, starting pitching at least, and then you look at the class of potential guys available among the starters in trade, and that's why there are so many big names there, whether it's Sale and Quintana and Archer, Odorizzi, Smiley in Tampa Bay, DeSclafani in Cincinnati, Sonny Gray in Oakland, and then Stroman's in that class. And so it's just a very active market, Jeff, right now for starting pitchers who have multiple years of control in general. And just in that environment, I think it's the responsible thing and the logical thing, if you're Mark Shapiro and Ross Atkins, to just see what kind of value Stroman has. And then adjust accordingly based on your needs. Because I think we would all agree, Jeff, you look at the outfield right now for the Jays, and this is really an interesting test for them because this is really, last offseason, it wasn't a huge winter from the standpoint of really chasing after free agents to fill desperate needs. Of course, they did bring in Happ from the outside. Estrada was retained, and they let David Price go. I think now that this wintertime is an interesting test because you and I have talked about this before, really for years. Now the Jays have made back-to-back ALCSs. They're firmly on the map as a World Series contender. How do they do now in terms of recruiting basically American-born free agents? It's always the big question, and how they compete. If all things are equal, do they have to overpay in some cases just for the comfort factor of going to a different country for some guys? So I think this is a really interesting test for them to see how they do. Do they have to overpay, or is the fact that they're winning now, which is certainly the way it was in the 90s where Toronto was the place to be and can be again, is the winning enough to really lure those guys over? And I think this offseason is going to be a very good test of that.